Title: Art Beyond Sight, Bringing Art and Culture to All. Opening the Digital Doorway. Leveraging Technology to Build Inclusive Museum Experiences. The Morgan Library, October 22, 2014. Georgia Krantz, Independent Educator and Consultant, Adjunct Professor, NYU Tisch School. The Potential of Mobile Apps in Museums.
Actually, this PowerPoint has 4 incredibly simple slides that just have talking points on them. I still have not gotten into the sort of rigor of making fancy PowerPoints. And also, I just kind of feel like what I'm going to be presenting here is something that I think will be kind of good for opening up conversation. It's a little narrative, so I decided not to try to map it in a PowerPoint. So on the screen, it's just the title of this talk, which is Mobile Apps, Cultural Experience and Accessibility, and in the lower right-hand corner. Oh, sorry. Do you want me to use the mic? Sorry. And in the lower right-hand corner, it's just my name. My name is Georgia, just like the state, and my last name is Krantz, Krantz. And I will be letting you know when I change the slides, which is, again, not a huge deal. So my name is Georgia, and I have been involved in accessibility largely through my former position at the Guggenheim as a Senior Education Manager for Adult and Access programs. And in that capacity, I worked on programming, but I also worked on other initiatives within the museum to try to kind of open the museum up to a greater degree to disability audiences. And one of the things I tried to focus on was kind of working across departments, meeting with the curators, meeting with the exhibition designers, meeting with the web team, etc., just to start a conversation as to how they might incorporate more accessibility measures in their own work. I am in no way an expert on accessibility across the board, so this was just me bringing resources and just having that important conversation, which is, access is not just about education. It's about all of us pulling together to try to make an institution or wherever we're working more accessible. So one of the departments with which I worked quite collaboratively was the digital media department. The director of that department was magnanimously, I don't think that's the right word, supportive of this idea of trying to make the web and our other digital assets more accessible. So that's the work I'm going to kind of focus on today, is the work that I did with the digital media department. So I'm not presenting a research paper. I'm presenting my own experience. I just want to make sure that that's really, really clear. And I'd just like to reemphasize, I am not an expert in the use of mobile technologies by people with disabilities. I did have the opportunity, as the Guggenheim was developing its first app, to decide that it was very, very important for somebody within the institution to be at the table in the development of this app, speaking on behalf of the needs of accessibility audiences. And so I decided to be that person since there was nobody else. And I did, in fact, become quite involved in the development of the app in a number of ways. So again, that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm just kind of hoping that the recounting of this experience will be useful for you in some way, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk about it a little bit more during the Q&A. So I've been asked to speak to 2 points. And at this time, I'm actually going to my next slide, and the 2 points are simply very clearly articulated on the slide. The first point is the potential of mobile apps in facilitating cultural experiences for people with disabilities. That's written at the top of the screen. And the second point is developing a mobile app optimized for accessibility, which in my work with the voiceover on our app, which I'll talk about, I was actually able to get involved in. So those 2 points are the only things on the screen. I think what I'm going to do is kind of refer back a little bit to what Annie was just talking about in her survey results. I was actually the Guggenheim representative for the museum's participation in the Art Beyond Sight multi-site museum study. So I was involved in one of the focus groups that came to the museum of people who like to attend museums to find out how we can make the museum more accessible. And this group was specifically a group of people with low vision and who were blind. And I just want to say that technology came up very fast, and not on the part of the people who were sort of coordinating the focus group, but on the part of the participants. And there was definitely an agreement around the table that technologies were, changing the ways that people could live, and it was really fantastic. One man said, you know, if one has to be blind, today's the day to do it. So he was very supportive. Now, I would like to say that not everybody's tech savvy, and not everybody likes to use technology, but even on the part of the people who, you know, admitted to not using technologies, they understood the tremendous value of the development of technologies for people with disabilities. So that kind of got me started. And at the time, the Guggenheim was beginning to develop its app. So this is kind of what I'm going to be talking about. And especially after this focus group, again, I kind of forced my way to the table. And was there from the early stages on, which was very exciting. I think somebody mentioned about the fact that you need to get in at the root, and trying to sort of make things accessible after the fact, especially technologies that have already been developed, is extremely difficult. So I was there for the wireframe designing stage, which was incredible. And they actually made space in the wireframes for verbal description tours and ASL tours. So that was part of the product that finally came out. There was space for those. We hadn't developed the tours yet, but space was made for them. And then I suggested that maybe we should try to customize our app, which is a custom app with voiceover. There was a lot of battle. It was very expensive. Finally, somebody, I don't know, encouraged the director to say yes, and somehow we got it budgeted. So those are the two aspects of the app that I worked on, was the verbal description tour and helping to develop the voiceover. So if we go back to the first point, and actually I'm going to switch my slide to the third slide, which simply has the first point articulated on it. So the potential of mobile apps and facilitating cultural experiences for people who are blind or have low vision. And I kind of changed it just because my kind of expertise is in sort of accessibility for people who are blind or have low vision, and I don't really feel qualified to speak to other disabilities. So that's what I do, so that's what I'm going to be speaking to. So if we go back to this first point, the reason I was so interested in including these tours, not only for ASL speakers, but also for people who are blind or have low vision, is to give them an independent experience at the museum. And I don't think I'm breaking ground here. I think we're all really, really understanding of the fact that whatever programs we can develop for people with disabilities, which are fantastic and which people love, to give people the choice to come independently, to have materials, resources available to people who just decide to walk in the door so that they can actually navigate the museum sort of on their own terms. That's something that I was always trying to work towards at the Guggenheim. And so I figured that, you know, the app tour gave them a choice. They could come to the Mind's Eye program, they can use the app tour. Of course, they have millions of other choices, but these were resources specifically developed for this audience. So choice, I think, is a huge, a very important thing. The tour also offered the opportunity for people who couldn't come to the museum to actually enjoy an exhibition, and that I was very excited about. And not just people who are blind or have low vision, but verbal description tours are fabulously beneficial for sighted people, for people with dyslexia, for people who speak foreign languages. But the idea that, you know, they could get a very, very detailed description of the paintings on the walls sitting on their couch in their jammies was something that I was very, very excited about. And by the way, the verbal description tours, every single stop also has transcripts, so also people who are deaf were definitely picking up the tour and reading through the transcripts. So that's the primary reason I argued for the tours. I wanted people to have an independent experience. Now, making the tour accessible was much more challenging than I had anticipated. And it was interesting because the process that was sort of articulated by those challenges were actually moments where cultural experiences were facilitated for and with people with disabilities, as well as people who don't identify themselves as having disabilities. And I'm just going to give you a few examples of that. The user testing for the verbal descriptions. You know, I wrote them, and then I brought in lots and lots of people with varying levels of vision to listen to them and to provide me with feedback. There was probably 10 people that came through. People were blind, people who had low vision, people who had different kinds of low vision. So there was this very, very lengthy back and forth where we met, we had phone calls and blah, blah, blah. And the user testers just loved it. I mean, they really felt extremely happy to be part of the process of the development, of literally the production of these tours. I mean, I would say that they wrote the descriptions. because they needed revisions, and it was from the point of view of somebody who really knows the field. So it was very exciting to make them sort of producers of this content. And they also learned a lot about how museums work. You know, making suggestions, and I would say, I'm terribly sorry, but we just can't do that. And understanding why. It was really useful for them because it helped them understand why when they go to a museum, they don't necessarily have everything they want, about the museum limitations, as somebody mentioned. And just about, you know, logistics and budget and the whole bit. One person wanted a long description and a short description. And I was thinking, that's a great idea. We didn't have the manpower, we didn't have the budget, we didn't have the space for something like that. So I just explained it to her. You know, and she was thrilled to know why, because it really made everything a lot more clear. So there was just a lot of incredible back and forth, and people were very, very happy with it. I mean, I don't like this word at all, but they really said they felt sort of an ownership over the content, which I thought was very important. A number of them said, you know, I brought my friends who have low vision to the museum to listen to the tour with me, and I could tell them that I was a major producer in this tour. So it was great. Then we had to train the entire frontline staff, not only about the verbal description tour, but about how to help people who are going to be asking about how to use the verbal description tour. So the antenna staff that handed out the devices got a full training with practice about how to hand them out, what information to give, where to tell people to go to start the first stop, the whole bit. People were coming out from behind the desk and guiding people to the center of the museum. The visitor services staff had to be completely trained, and the security staff had to be completely trained. And the security staff in particular was important because as I wrote this tour, realizing that sort of the navigational element of this tour was just a nightmare for me. I mean, anybody who's ever tried to navigate the Guggenheim, like sighted, it's already incredibly confusing. I brought in a number of experts who work on navigation within different kinds of institutions, and they were just like, this is a nightmare, you know, be happy to help you, but this is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. So you know, and at the beginning I was trying to describe exactly, you know, how you would get to the next stop and things you would pass and how much time it would take, and of course the tour became so long that it was completely non-viable. So I ended up doing very brief descriptions, just telling people that it will be on the next ramp, you know, the number of the stop, and then I trained the security staff to be able to identify people who might be using these tours and to, you know, kind of graciously go up and say, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'm a member of the security staff, what number are you on your tour, and I'd be happy to guide you there. So we have security staff on every ramp. It actually worked really, really well. And they loved this training. The security staff was just so excited. We got emails from people saying that, you know, this is incredibly successful. Somebody actually approached me and asked me, you know, if I needed help. So that was a very, very good thing. So, I mean, in the end, there was just a lot of back and forth between, you know, audiences with disabilities and audiences of people who don't identify as having disabilities, and the learning that went on in those conversations, in those interactions, in those challenges was really quite extraordinary, and people still talk about it. So I feel like that was really facilitating cultural experience, not necessarily in terms of, you know, museum makes tour, please use it, but just a deeper connection between audiences to kind of help understanding.
Georgia, I hate to say it, but 5 minutes.
That's perfect. Okay. So I'm going to go on to the voiceover component, developing a mobile app optimized for accessibility, and I'm glad we only have 5 minutes because I decided not to write this out. I was using my notes before, as you may have noticed, and I didn't write it out just because I don't even know how. So I'm going to briefly just tell you the experience of what it was like to say, we need voiceover, you know, at a meeting with all these upper level people, and then them saying yes, and then what do we do, right? So, I mean, again, I've used voiceover because I'm interested in voiceover, but I don't know anything about developing voiceover, and I figure that's fine. The developers will take care of it. Which makes sense. I mean, we told the developers that we wanted voiceover. They said that's no problem. They've got experts on their team. Everything is good. And then one day I got an email from the digital department, and it said, The developers are going to be sending us a document that has every single functionality in the app listed, and you are supposed to provide language for each one of those functionalities. And I was just like, oh boy, I was like, and of course I could kind of say, yeah, I mean, it should say back, or it should say this, or it should say that, but I had no knowledge of standards of language for voiceover. Of course, come to find out that there are none, which is why this is all such a problem. And actually, I know there are people who are working on that, which I think is fantastic. So anyway, I kind of emailed them back and I said, I don't understand. You said you do voiceover. Why don't you use the language? And they said, well, because your app is custom. The language is going to need to be custom, and you're going to have to tell us what you want to use. So, I frantically called one of my colleagues in the digital department and I said, will you do this with me? Because I'm also not an app expert. I mean, I don't know how to identify all of the functionalities in an app, and even if they're listed for me, I don't even know what they're talking about. So we worked together. We went through the list. Of course, we found about 50, 60 more functionalities that had been left off the list, and so we needed to identify those in the right language. So basically, we sent it in. We got a response saying, this is great. We have a lot of suggestions for the language based on what we know about conventions in voiceover language. And I'm just like, why didn't you tell me that before? Before we sat for 2 days and literally just poured through this list. I mean, we were just ready to tear each other's hair out by the end of it. Anyway, I know I only have a few minutes. So, I guess what happened is that we just took this kind of big, unwieldy project with a couple of different teams, not really knowing A, what was going to be in the app, but B, how the other team was working with voiceover, what they understood about voiceover, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess what I wish I had done is, not shy away from it, but certainly talk to the development team right away about what they can and can't do, what they do need from us. So I could have set up a team, to take a look at that, and I think it would have been a little easier. On the other hand, I learned an amazing amount about voiceover, which was very exciting, and I'm going to use it all the time now. So that's exciting, and I'm helping work on the iPad version of the app also. By the way, we did do user testing, of course, with the voiceover. We did not hire a professional firm to do that. I went out into the community and found people that I know who are blind, who are tech savvy, and kind of had them go through it, made recommendations. Those went back to the developers. We, created a new version. It went back to the testers. But these were people in the community who use voiceover, and that's all we could afford. So that's what we did.
Copyright Art Beyond Sight, 2014.